don't want what we know out there.
How a person can go from really almost nothing to becoming a millionaire by owning rental properties.
He would always buy these flip houses, and I just remember thinking, this guy is crazy. Why would he buy that house?
In the past decade, there's been a huge surge in the peer-to-peer short-term rental market.
Become an insider. So you have to know the rules before you get the game.
Every second counts. So make every second count.
Welcome to the Real Estate Jam. Whether you're just beginning or the best of the best, we're glad you're here. We will share successes, failures, and strategies for the action-taking real estate investor. And now to your hosts, JD, Annabelle, and Melissa.
Hey guys, welcome to the Real Estate Jam podcast. I'm JD with
Melissa.
My wonderful co-host,
Hey,
Melissa. We got a good show for you today. We haven't talked a lot about this subject before, and it just maybe a couple of times. And we're super happy to have Fernando Angelucci. He's the senior managing partner at Impact Self Storage. This dude's a phenomenal businessman. Mm-hmm. He's been doing somewhere around 50 million in self-storage in the last 3 years, all while under the age of 30. He's
awesome.
a young buck, and I'm sure he has a lot more to give before it's over. So, Fernando, thanks a lot for joining us today, man. I'm glad that you're here.
Me too. Thank you.
JD, Melissa, thanks for having me.
Great. Well, Fernando, usually the way we started out is to have you introduce yourself to our audience, let them know why they should listen to you, and then we'll go from there. Tell us a little bit about how your origin story, right? It's
Sure.
a pretty amazing story, and I think it'll help a lot of our listeners out. And then we'll ask questions as we go.
Perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we go all the way back, I'm the son of two immigrants from Brazil. When I was born, they had the old school American dream for me. They wanted me to go to school, get good grades, graduate, get a job at some Fortune 50 company, and retire with a pension after 40 years, right?
The American.
So I was going along that path. And then when I was 16 years old, I ended up reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and it kind of broke that logic for me, if you will. So I went to my dad and said, hey, this real estate thing seems like the way I want to go. I don't know about engineering or going to college. And he about dropped dead in front of me and said, you're going to college. And he gave me the kind of the Henry Ford speech, right? You can have any color as long as it's black. He said, you can have any degree as long as it ends in the words engineering. So I ended up going to school. I got an ag bioengineering degree, but all throughout college, I was reading all the Rich Dad books, going to seminars, going to RIA meetings, trying to get as educated as possible. I've always been someone that thinks the best investment you can make is not in an asset, it's in yourself. So the more you invest in yourself, the more it's going to pay back. So I got out of school. I actually did do what my dad wanted me to do. I got a job at a Fortune 50 company with a 401k, an expense account, a truck, and a pension, believe it or not. Lasted about 13 months there. I quit in I quit in a blaze of glory, if you will. Burned all the bridges.
Oh,
good.
Burn the boats. That's what we like to call it.
Yeah.
No treat.
Yeah. Just so I know I couldn't go back if things started getting tough. I had to succeed. Good. And then, there I am. I'm 21, 22 years old, and I need startup capital to start a residential wholesaling business. So what I ended up doing was in one night, in a period of about 4 hours, I applied to 62 credit cards, and I got, I think, 12 approved. I waited till all 12 came, and then I cash advanced $100,000 off those credit cards as a 22-year-old. So
I think that
I love that
we should say that is a dangerous strategy, and
don't do that.
I'm really
do not do that.
I mean, you got to know your own risk level, right? Melissa's all about it. I'm a little bit more reserved. So I think that just understanding that is out there and available is good. Mm-hmm. And if you had to use it, if my choice was use the credit cards and do real estate, or not use the real cards and the credit cards and not do real estate, I'm going to choose to use the cards personally. But just make sure you got the education and know what you're doing before you jump into $100,000 of credit card.
Right.
17.
You're my hero.
I don't think I should be anyone's hero for that.
Did it work?
So
that's the question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that being said, looking back, first of all, I would never tell anybody to do what I did.
Yeah.
What I didn't realize at the time is that there's money all around you in your friends and family network that believe in you and willing to invest. At the time, I didn't know that. I didn't know about OPM. So the only OPM I knew about was credit cards. So they're very easy to get. So I took that $100,000, immediately lost 30, like in a week, it was just gone. I'm just like, oh, what did I do? Mm-hmm. So now I'm 30 in the hole of that 100. And I said, okay, I got to really make this thing work. Started doing residential wholesaling in Des Moines, Iowa. That's where I was stationed for my previous job with that Fortune 50 company, and just decided to stay there instead of coming back to Chicago. And then from there, very quickly started to build up a coffer for down payments by doing the wholesaling. Okay. So then I bought my first rental property, which was a 5-unit apartment building in the middle of nowhere in Iowa. It was $40,000 for that 5-unit apartment building. And it was real tough. It was like, one of the units rented for $350 a month type tough. Right.
We know that.
We've been there.
We know that $350 a month rent
Yeah.
But I learned a lot, right? And so from there, I continued to grow the wholesaling business, ended up scaling out to multiple states, then started buying single family rentals. From the single family rentals, continued to buy multifamily rentals and started to scale that up. But then, around 2016 or 2017 or so, I thought the market was going to crash. And I've been saying that for like years and continued to say it for years afterwards.
We're saying right now.
Right. So around 2016, I started looking for a different asset class. I ended up running into a mentor of mine and started learning about self-storage. And between 2016 and 2018, I sold my entire rental portfolio, both single family and multifamily homes, and then started to trade up into storage. Now, in the beginning, I didn't know if I was underwriting these storage facilities well or not. So I just looked back at what I was doing in the residential side and said, hey, if I can get a storage facility under contract and wholesale it to another investor, that means A, I've done my numbers right, and I've gotten the property under contract at a level that is reasonable for someone out there, which means I'm doing a good job for myself.
Absolutely.
So after wholesaling one or two of those, then I started to look at facilities to keep personally. And this is when I really started to leverage OPM. I bought my very first facility. It was about 17,000 square feet, 133 units or so outside of the city of Chicago, where I'm from and where I live right now. Bought it for $1 million, and I did not have the down payment money to buy it. But the way that I work is kind of, ready, fire, then aim. So I got under contract because I know if you have a good deal, everything else will fall in place eventually. So I got the property under contract, and just so happens that one of my cash buyers from back in the Iowa days gave me a call. He said, hey, I'm going to go speak at a Fortune Builders event. I'd love to chat with you while I'm in Chicago. So we ended up having breakfast, and I started telling him about self-storage. He remembered me talking about it right when I started learning about it before I left Iowa. He said, hey, that seems like a real good deal. What if I were to give you the money for the down payment on that and we partnered up? I said, that would be great. I was actually looking for a partner. So ended up buying that first facility in August of 2018 for $1 million. And as of last month, I just crossed over the $50 million mark on the self-storage.
That is crazy.
That is amazing.
It's just
So that's kind of how I was able to transition from that residential small multifamily into self-storage. And then once I started getting larger and larger, then we started to, even my friends and family network didn't have the money that I needed. So then we started doing real estate syndications, primarily 506B and 506C syndications, which allowed us to raise money from accredited investors. And that's how we've been able to grow so quickly in the last 3 years. And so I did all of that. I actually just turned 30 2 months ago. So on the path to total self-storage world domination,
nice.
Our goal is by 2030, so December of 2030, to be at about 8.5 million square feet of storage, which would put us in the top 20 operators in the nation.
Wow.
Awesome.
That is so cool.
Yes.
I love that story.
there's a whole bunch of things to unpack, but some of the big takeaways that I got was that you started out as a regular dude doing wholesales. You traded up in asset classes until you got to syndicating self-storage, right?
Right.
And I think, from somebody who starts out wholesaling, looking at self-storage syndication, looking at $50 million worth of self-storage, that seems like such a huge gap. But really, what was the timeline from your first wholesale deal till your last purchase of self-storage? What does that timeline look like? How many years is that?
Yeah. So I wholesaled my first single family home in the southeast part of Des Moines, Iowa. I believe it was 2014. And so here we are, 2021. So what is that? 7 years?
Yeah.
7 years later. And so one of the things that I learned very early on is, as a wholesaler, you don't realize what you have access to, right? You have all of these smart investors that have cash, that are buying deals, that have way more experience than you. So what you should do is, every time someone wants to get onto your wholesale list, you should interview them and say, hey, how many market crashes have you been through? Have you lost your tail? Yes or no? Why? If you did not, why not? And learn from those things. And one of the common themes that I kept learning from some of my shark buyers, the guys that would buy, 50 properties a year or so, is like, hey, if you never sell, if you can, do all the work up front, why kill the golden goose that's laying the eggs, right? Build up that equity, build up that cash flow. Because what the problem with a lot of wholesalers, and this was an issue that I faced as well, was you keep chasing the deals and you keep reinvesting your capital in more wholesale deals, more fix and flip deals. But all you're doing is you're creating a larger and a larger and a larger job for yourself, a JOB, right? A just over broke. So that's not the life that I wanted to live. I wanted to golf, 3 days a week. I wanted to travel 4 to 6 months out of the year. And to do that, you need steady passive income. So what I started doing right off the bat was, as soon as I would take all my wholesale proceeds and I would live like on ramen, I'd go to Costco and I'd buy like 60 packs of ramen cups, because every dollar that I got from my wholesale deals would go to two places. One would go to more marketing for more deals, and then the other place would go into down payment funds so that I could start building up my own cash flow reserves. I never really got into fix and flipping because the margins I was pulling off on the wholesale deals were almost as good as flipping them, and I'd be able to make that cash in 2 weeks as opposed to 6 or 12 months. And all the liability that comes along with flipping houses. Yes. So I just decided to focus straight up on the passive income. And very quickly, it's interesting when you're buying, looking back when I was 22, 23 years old, it seemed like such an insane task to try it. I think my first goal was trying to get to $5,000 a month passive income. And when I started my very first deal, I was like, I remember that 5-unit property, I was netting like $600 a month, maybe. And I was like, oh my God, this is going to be so hard. This is going to be real tough. But then what you don't realize, our brains as humans, we think in everything as linear, that everything is additive. But what you don't realize, especially with investing in real estate investing, is that everything's actually exponential. So in the beginning, you have this giant concrete flywheel, and it's just like such a pain to even move it an inch. But then it starts going faster and faster and faster. And then all you need to do is, after it's catching speed, is just tap it with your finger every once in a while. And it's like spinning real fast. And that's what ends up happening with passive income, is as you start adding more and more and more, all of a sudden you go from $500 a month to $1,000, then to $2,000, to the $6,000, and the $10,000, to then $20,000 a month. And once you're sitting at, even, it doesn't even have to be a crazy number, but once you're sitting at about $5,000 a month in passive income, like, you're free. I mean, I can live on $5,000 a month very easily.
Right.
So at that point, and then you can spend all your time no longer worrying about how you're going to pay for expenses and pay for living, but only worrying about how can I increase my passive income on a monthly basis. And then that's going to help you get more leverage, which is the key to real estate. You need to be lendable. So if you're not showing income, if you're not paying taxes on that income, I learned that the hard way, no one's going to give you a loan. So immediately I started to pay myself a W-2 out of my corporation just so I can look lendable. I showed very healthy cash flows, and that was able to that's where I was able to really leverage loans to build quickly, especially in the storage space, because storage has such a low default rate compared to every other real estate asset class out there. Banks love them to the point where I was getting loans offered to me at 85 to 90% loan to cost. Now that may not seem a lot for someone that's using FHA loans, but you can only use FHA loans so many times. And then even if you swap into conventional, you can only use them so many times. 5% down conventional. Eventually you're going to have to go to the commercial side of the world where they're going to be requiring 20, 30% down.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty.
We're going through that right now.
Pretty much what we're going through for sure. Melissa's bankable. I'm not. So we fight and struggle through those too, but they're real concerns. Maybe, for our guys who are starting out and they're starting to look and expand their horizons on these different asset classes, can we talk about a little bit about how you're evaluating the self-storage and what makes a good, you said that you didn't know when you first started out and that's why you wholesaled them. So you couldn't tell necessarily what a good deal was. Can we talk about how you evaluate them and what kind of things you look for and what that process looks like?
Sure. And before I go into that, I'd just like to talk about why I do self-storage compared to single family and multifamily. I already touched on one, which is the leverage and the low debt, the low default rate. So that's inherently already lowering my risk. The second is if you look at annual average returns for the last 30, 35 years, self-storage has outperformed every other real estate asset class. Single family and multifamily return on average about 13% over the last 30 years. Self-storage returning about 17%. Now that 4% may not seem like a lot, but you got to realize over 30 years, 4% compounded is a huge amount of money. So for example, if we started 30 years ago with $100,000 and you put it into multifamily, you'd have about $1.6, $1.7 million today. If you put that same $100,000 into self-storage, you'd have about 4 million, a little over $4 million. So that 4% in compounding interest is actually over double your return on the single family and the multifamily space.
Right. Wow.
The other piece was investing in those kind of challenging areas that I started with, because those are the only types of properties I could afford at the time, came with a ton of headaches. Yes. And my passive income, and for those that aren't watching and are just listening, I'm using air quotes here. My passive income wasn't very passive at all. I was working 50, 60 hours a week, constantly dealing with tenants, toilets, trash, HVAC systems going out in the Midwest in the middle of the winter, AC not working in the middle of the summer, pipes bursting, hot water heaters not working. It was just such a pain. And I just got so stressed, and that was not the life that I wanted to live. Yeah. I wanted to be a chill cucumber. Right. So that's why I started to trade up into storage. The management of such assets was also so much easier than single family or multifamily. So once I realized that storage was the way to go, then I had to start figuring out what is a good storage facility. Right. So here's the main things that I usually recommend you look for. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to speak in generalities for your first 1 to 3 deals as you're learning. And then once you get a pretty good track record like I have now, then you could start breaking some of these rules to see opportunity. But again, the way that I look at all self-storage deals, especially when you're raising money from other investors, is I don't care about the upside. What is most important is how do you mitigate the downside risk? Because once you do that, the upside is just icing on the cake, right? So number one, you're going to want to buy in a market that has good job growth, good population growth. That's going to make everything so much easier. If you do that alone, it's going to be almost impossible to lose money in self-storage, right? The second thing is you're going to want a facility that is extremely visible, because a large percentage of your customer base is going to be coming from a 3 to 5 mile radius. And it's usually going to be the people that they drive past your storage facility every day going to and from work. They never even realize it until the day they need storage. And then, I remember now driving past Fernando's storage facility for the last 6 years and never needing it, right? So storage typically serves those that are in transition. So if you're upsizing, if you're downsizing, if you got a new job, if you're moving out of a house and moving into a different house, these are all the areas that storage really helps with. So good market, good location, right? If you can get as close as you can to Main and Main, that's going to be best. I typically will recommend that you stay away from like the urban core, because then you're going to be fighting with the big REITs, the real estate investment trusts, and they're going to be driving cap rates down to 3, 4, 5%. And that's not what we want to buy. So what I usually tell people is buy stuff in the suburbs, or even better in the exurbs. So not quite rural, not quite suburbs, but you know, the types of areas I'm talking about. You know, 3 years ago, there was cornfields, and all of a sudden now there's all these new homes over there, right? That's the type of area you want to buy in, because then you can buy properties that are pretty cheap, and then they raise in value very quickly in a period of 3 to 5 years because of the development around you. We also like secondary markets. Yeah, I'm sorry.
We have a lot of that going on here, like a lot of D.R. Horton homes going up where there was just like
nothing,
woods, right?
Yeah, swamps.
Yeah.
We like to chase those guys. And this is going to be a little bit more advanced right now. But once you get to the point where you're building self-storage facilities, what we do is we'll find out where the D.R. Hortons of the world are going to build, because their typical time to break ground is 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
And for us, we can break ground in like 6 months. So we'll get ahead of them, build up. And then by the time we're leasing up, they start building the houses around us. Right.
Right. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I'd recommend. On your very first deal, you're also going to want to look for certain demographic data that's going to help you out. So I like to see median income amounts about $40,000 or above for the area. That means that the people have enough disposable income that they can pay for additional storage, but they don't have too much income where they can just buy a bunch of land themselves and store whatever they need, or buy a bunch of buildings. I also like to see traffic counts that are, you know, pretty substantial. So when I say traffic count, there's ways that you can get these by going to state websites, and you can literally see on your curb cut. So on the street that people turn into your facility, they'll be at some point in time, the state did a count of how many cars pass that area per day. And so what I like to see is a minimum of 12,000 cars per day. I prefer to get it a little bit higher if I can, maybe 16,000, but 12,000 or more is really good. Very visible signage, if you can get it. If it's not there currently, that's just a good value add for you to do. So the other thing that I always tell people is, because self-storage is a commercial asset, it is valued on a cap rate, which means it is valued based off of its income generating potential. So unlike single family homes and small multifamily, you know, 4 units and below, where if you have a neighbor that just happens to sell to a wholesaler and at some crazy low price, that's going to drop your value, because now that is a comparable that the appraiser is going to use. That doesn't happen in commercial properties. In commercial properties, you have a cap rate that's set by the market. Typically, it's a spread to what the current interest rates are. And then from there, if you can either raise income or drop expenses, you are increasing the value of your facility. Mm-hmm. So I like to buy only value add deals. I do not buy anything that's stabilized. So what I like to see is, typically it's a mom and pop owner. They are either the original owner or maybe the second owner. They are not very tech savvy. They don't do market studies. They don't do competitor analysis. So when I walk in, maybe I can't find them on Google. That's a huge no-no. About 60% of our tenants find us from our cell phone, right? So not only if you don't have a website, but if your website is not mobile optimized, you're going to lose a ton of clientele.
Yeah.
The second thing is finding a facility that is super underpriced. So say they're charging their people, you know, $50 for a 10 by 10 unit when all the competitors are charging $100. That's a great deal to walk in. And the very first day you go in there, you just jack all the rates up to maybe $95. So you're still cheaper than all the competitors, but you just doubled the value of your facility, right? In one day. I also like to see any type of movement in the area, any type of development in the area that may, you know, add value to me later on. And then the ability to drop expenses. So we talked about raising the income or raising the rent when you come in, but there's also a lot of things that these non-sophisticated owners don't know about on the expense side. So maybe they're not using technology to get the property running. And maybe they're paying 2 full-time staff members a total of $80,000 a year. Well, I can typically get rid of all the staff members, or maybe just bring in a part-time maintenance person to sometimes, you know, do overlocks or check units to see if they're vacant. So all of a sudden my labor cost goes from $80,000 down to like 15 or 12.
Right.
So all of that is super high value for us. what we tell all of our acquisition guys in our company is, for every $100 you either save me or make me per month, that increases the value of my facility by $15,000. Wow. So just remember that. You're break it down to small pieces for your team, right? Every $100 you save me or every $100 you make me per month, that's an extra $15,000 in value. So that's what we're going to be typically looking for. We like these value add deals. Dropping expenses on labor is very important, because typically in self-storage, your two largest costs are labor and then property taxes. So how do you lower your property taxes? Well, there's two ways that we typically will do it. One is before we buy the property, and that's by separating the purchase price. So the interesting thing about self-storage is not only is it considered real estate, but it's also considered a business. So what I can do is say I'm buying a facility for $1 million. And I say, hey, seller, I'm going to give you $1 million, but I'm actually going to split the price up. I'm going to give you $600,000 for your land and the improvements on the land. And I'm going to give you $400,000 for the business and the goodwill. Well, guess which purchase price the tax assessor sees? They see the land and improvements. So they're only going to tax me based off a $600,000 purchase price, not $1 million purchase price.
Funny. That's the first time that I've ever heard that described. And I think that's genius.
Mm-hmm. That's so awesome.
Super smart.
Right. So then the second thing you can do is, once you buy the property, the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to call a property tax attorney in the area. Typically, he's a good old boy or she's a good old lady. She's been there for 20, 30 years. She knows the assessors. Their kids go to school together. And I say, hey, I need you to go fight my taxes for me. They say, no problem. We'll get you. Because what we'll find out is self-storage is relatively new when it comes to real estate, right? There wasn't self-storage 100 years ago. There's been single family and multifamily homes since people have been building buildings, right? So what will happen is the assessors sometimes don't know how to properly assess the tax rate on your self-storage facility. And they'll put all these different comps that make no sense, like a medical office building, or like a Class A office building, or like a manufacturing plant. And you say, hey, these are nothing like what we do. You know, we don't have a lot of traffic counts. We don't cause a lot of damage to the roadways. It's unfair to tax us the same that you're taxing these other types of properties. And right there, we can usually get a 20 or 30% reduction in our property taxes. Okay. Another big area that we see from non-sophisticated investors where they're overpaying for their expenses is on property insurance. So self-storage is awesome because of the way the laws are written. So this was one of my biggest pet peeves of owning multifamily and single family homes in the Chicagoland area. If you guys don't know, and especially for your listeners, Chicago is basically like San Francisco when it comes to tenant rights. The tenants have all the rights. The landlords are looked at like these big evil Mr. Moneybags, and we always gets stuck to us, right? So with self-storage, it's the exact opposite. In self-storage, all of the liabilities on the tenants. The owners take no liability. There's no implied or expressed warranties of habitability. If my facility burns down and you did not have renter's insurance on your stuff, too bad. That's not my problem, right? That's your problem because you didn't insure your goods. And the other part of the law that's really great about storage is that we are not guided by rental landlord law like single family and multifamily. We're guided by lien law or property law, which means I don't have to do evictions. When someone puts their stuff into my facility, they are automatically giving me a lien against their possessions. And if they do not pay, I auction off their stuff. And in 30 days, I have a new tenant moving in. So I don't have to deal with, I have a lot of friends in the multifamily and single family space right now that they're just getting crushed with these eviction moratoriums.
Yeah.
They've had tenants that haven't paid for 10, 12 months and there's nothing they can do, right? There's literally nothing they can do because that's what the government said. Storage is not that way. We didn't have any moratoriums during the pandemic. Our returns were better than ever because a lot of people were downsizing, because a lot of people were moving into apartments with friends and just try to save money. A lot of people ended up using storage. So one of the things that, because of that very low liability for us is the insurance. What your typical person will do is call their Jake from State Farm and say, hey, Jake, you do my car, you do my house. Like, why don't you insure my self-storage facility? But the problem is that guy, that insurance agent doesn't know how to value the the premiums are built based on what is the percentage chance that this person is going to make a claim against the insurance policy. And if you're going to someone that doesn't understand storage, they're going to give you a premium that's super high. So very easily, we're able to drop our insurance premium by 50% because we go to a self-storage specific insurer that knows that all the liabilities on the tenant, we take no liability or very little liability. So we're going to have a much lower likelihood of making a claim against the insurance. So all of a sudden, where the seller was paying $6,000 a year for their property insurance, now I'm paying like $1,500 or $2,000 a year.
Right.
So that, and again, remember, every $100 I save per month is an extra $15,000 in value on my facilities.
Right.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that is great. Well, jumping into a big 50 unit or $50 million type of facilities is one thing, but when you're starting out, what is the size that you're looking for? Are you talking to like these 4-unit storage facilities? Are we talking 20 units? We're talking 100. What do you think that the guy starting out, what's that? Because there is a level, just like going from single family homes to multifamily homes or small multi to large multi, where it doesn't make sense unless you're going to self-manage and work the counter yourself and do that kind of stuff. What's that level that makes it worth your time?
Yeah. So in the self-storage world, we typically will use net rentable square feet as opposed to units, right? Mm-hmm. Because you can have a 5x5 unit, which is 2,500 or 25 square feet. Or you can have a 10 by 20, which is 200 square feet. Right. So what we'll do is we'll measure everything based off of square footage. So the very first facility I bought was a 17,000 square foot facility. It was about 133 units. But that's just because that was the first one I found that was a pretty good deal. I also wholesale self-storage facilities that are too small for me to other, first-time guys that want to get started. And we just did one last year that it was $100,000 self-storage facility. It was 16 units, right? We sold it at 11% cap rate to our investors bought it. So what people don't realize is you can buy a self-storage facility for the same price that you can buy a rental, single family or duplex.
Right.
Like in your guys' market, what's your typical rental cost on something that you'll buy?
Well, we're somewhere between $100,000 and $150,000 for the ones that make sense as far as cash flow with the long-term rental. We can go a little bit higher than that for the ones that we use as short-term rentals.
Short-term.
But, 150,000 for a good rental that cash flows.
So there you go. You can buy a facility at that exact same price.
Yeah.
There's 72,000 or 73,000 self-storage facilities in the United States, and a lot of them are actually really small. The big ones that I do are actually very rare to buy, let alone build. So on average, I would say get started with a facility that's maybe 10 to 30,000 square feet. And that's going to be anywhere between 400,000 to about $1 million, depending on which markets you're in, right? I bought a 17,000 square foot facility for $1 million because it just happened to be outside of Chicago, which is a pretty high cost market. But I love buying facilities in super rural areas. I buy stuff in Tennessee and North Carolina, Alabama, Louisiana, like areas where the cash flow is fantastic. The price point is super low. Labor costs are very low. Property tax costs are really low. Texas, really love Texas. It's hard to find facilities there because apparently everybody else loves Texas too.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, in the beginning, what I'd say is, your first facility is where you're going to learn everything. I thought I knew everything, and what happens is you can go pay for courses or you can do all this self-study education, but really that's about only 20% of what you really need to know. And you're going to learn the other 80% by running your first facility yourself. So what I usually tell people is self-storage, just like in single family and multifamily, if you're hiring a third-party manager without ever doing the management yourself, you're going to get taken.
Yep.
Right. They're going to take advantage of you.
Mm-hmm.
You have to operate your first facility. And that's what we did. So our first facility, we operated ourselves for about 8 months. We learned a lot. We bought that one at a 7% cap rate. And we're now operating at just about 11% internal return. We've expanded the facility already. We've added another 33% of units on there. And after that 8 months of running our first self-storage facility and learning how the management works in our own backyard, I think it was only a 2-hour drive from where I live. Then I said, okay, this is awesome. I know how to run it. I feel comfortable. Now let's go into better markets. Let's get out of these high tax markets like Illinois, and let's go into like the South or the Bible Belt. These are the areas where you can find a ton of great deals at very good cap rates, at very low cost. And so our first 8 months, we only had one facility. Our next 8 months, we bought 6 more. And that was by raising capital. And basically that buying your first one and managing yourself does 2 things. One, it gives you the experience, but 2, it gives you the track record.
Yeah.
So then you can start going to all your friends and say, hey, you know how I told you I was getting out of single family or multifamily? I was thinking about doing this self-storage thing. Well, look at the results that I was able to get in the last 8 months. Like, how awesome is that? Do you want to get involved on the next one I do? Let me know. How would you like to make, a 15 or 20% return? That's typically what we target for our investors.
Nice.
And I very rarely do I tell somebody, or do I get somebody telling me that 15 to 20% is too low for them.
Yeah, the other real investors might give you that, but anybody that's not an active investor is probably not gonna push that 12 to 15% aside.
Yeah.
So, or 15 to 20%. So where can our audience find out more about you? Where can they connect with you? Where can they go if maybe they want to learn a little bit more about self-storage and that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So if you go to our website, impactselfstorage.com, you'll be able to find everything about us. I would really recommend that you follow us on all the social media channels: Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram. Our Facebook and our LinkedIn are the most active, and we post 3 to 5 times a day educational content on how to get started, how to find your first facility. And we put out, honestly, in the last couple of weeks, I've put out maybe 12 hours of videos of just going from marketing to them, underwriting them, how to do the value add, how to do the management, how to build portfolios, how to syndicate them, and just go all the way up. Because people look at self-storage, and I did the same thing when I was first in a residential and multifamily space, was, these are huge assets and I'll wait and I'm going to eventually get down there. But you don't have to wait. You can start right now. What I've noticed is when you add a 0 onto every type of deal that you're doing, it just becomes easier to do. It becomes easier to raise the money. It becomes easier to get the debt. Me raising 50 grand for single family and multifamily homes was like pulling teeth. And I just closed a loan that was $10 million. And it was probably one of the easiest loans I've ever done compared to like a $50,000 single family home loan. So you can get started right now on these small facilities. And the biggest thing is these storage facilities, there's so much downside risk mitigation that truly it's almost impossible to lose money. As long as you're buying it right, the expense ratios are super low. So if you buy something with just cash, you only need to be at about 35 to 40% occupancy to break even. If you buy something with a loan and you really lever up like I did, in the 80, 85% loan to value range, you only need to be at like 65 to 68% occupancy to be cash flowing. So like if you could lose 40% of your customers overnight and still be making money, which would never happen, right? That just won't
not
happen.
in a single family or a multifamily stuff. Well, I think that's great. I think there's a lot of takeaways. I wish we would have met you when we were evaluating the self-storage unit down there on the beach, but I think that's great, man. Fernando, you got a lot of knowledge, and I hope that our listeners come and visit your socials and stuff, because I think there's a lot more there. I'm going to go subscribe to them right as soon as we get done. But we do really appreciate you having on the show today, and I can't wait to talk to you again.
Talk to you guys soon.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you for listening to the Real Estate Jam. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more information, check out our website, therealestatejam.com, or find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at The Real Estate Jam. If you have any questions, feel free to drop us an email at therealestatejam@gmail.com. See you next episode.